Welcome back to the AI Minds podcast. This is a podcast where we explore the companies of tomorrow being built AI first. I am your host, Demetrios, and this episode, like every other episode, is brought to you by DeepGram, the #1 text-to-speech and speech-to-text API on the internet today, trusted by the world's top enterprises, conversational AI leaders, and startups, some of which you may have heard of, like Spotify, Twilio, NASA, and Citibank. It is my pleasure to get to introduce our guest today because this one is pretty special for me. Michael, the CEO and co-founder of Cerebrium. How you doing, dude? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Well, I was telling you before we hit record that I've been geeking out on Cerebrium, and I love what you all are doing. But I want to dive into your story because you have been an entrepreneur since the day you were born. It sounds like you started a few companies while at university, and then just during COVID, you had quite the success story. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, sure. So that company was called OneCart. I was based in South Africa at that time. That's where I'm from, and it was simply similar to Instacart. So we delivered groceries to your door in under an hour. And, we were growing pretty steadily, kind of before COVID. And then I guess when COVID happened, there was actually our president went and did like an address to the nation, was like, use this app and order your groceries. And I guess from there we kind of took off. I mean, we talk about
You got an endorsement. That is
yeah,
huge.
so glad to know the president knew about us. And essentially from there, I mean, we scaled rapidly. We went from $150,000 a month to like over $200,000 a day in a couple months, hired like 500 people in a couple weeks. And eventually, we got acquired by Walmart a few years later. So pretty good outcome. Definitely have a lot of other war stories from that time.
Yeah, maybe as you think back through the war stories and growing and just all of the trials and tribulations that you faced, is there one that you tend to remember more than others?
The one thing that we had to do as a founding team was, obviously we were like, people were paying for groceries on their credit cards, and obviously the bank only settles that cash about 2 days later. But because we were growing so quickly and each day our like amounts were just getting larger and larger, us the founders had to float the company. But we're talking like, millions of rands as like founders. And so we constantly kept risking it. And like looking back now, it was actually pretty stupid to do that. But luckily it paid off for the long run. Eventually we got some partnerships with banks to like float that for us. But I mean, things like that, that's just the start of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, some crazy things were happening.
It reminds me of the book about the Nike founder, Shoe Dog, where he was constantly running into cash flow issues when he had his first company before starting Nike, because he would buy all the shoes and then sell them. But before you actually get that money to go and buy more shoes, you need to pony up. And so he was going to the banks trying to negotiate deals, and you have to know a few bankers and you recognize they can make your life a lot easier.
No, look, e-commerce is a very tough business. I mean, margins are tight, volumes are high. There's logistics and inventory issues. No, it was a lot of problems to solve at one time.
Yeah. So then did you just vest and rest at Walmart?
No. So what happened is, we had like golden handcuffs. So they wanted us to stay for a couple of years. They were going to give us like a war chest to continue growing the product. I was 25, I think at the time, 26. And I could just, I had all these ideas. Now we had all this cash that we could use to like grow this company even bigger. And I could just see that they were not going to do anything that I wanted to do. And we were just going to coast and like integrate with, Walmart's local, retailer called Macro. And so I went to like one of my mentors and I was like, I'm really going to like ride out this 3-year, just, the prime time of my life and just sit here. And he was like, okay, well, the money that I would walk away from, because obviously not all of it vests, straight away. The money that I walk away from, would I be able to make it back sooner if I did something else, like start another company? And I said 100%. And he was like, cool, I'll fund it. And so yeah, basically like a week later, I quit. And then he funded and like gave an angel investment to like an idea that I didn't even have. I had to like go figure out an idea and find something. So that's kind of what happened.
So you don't know what you're doing next. You just know that you have the support of a mentor who has almost written you a blank check. And how did you land on a pretty difficult field and idea to go and execute on, right? You did not play the game on easy mode.
Yeah. I mean, I studied machine learning and stats and computer science at university, and I was always interested in it. And at OneCart, we tried to implement machine learning, and it was honestly the worst 6 months of my life. Like, tooling was fragmented, it was expensive. Even as a rapidly scaling startup where we, had lots of people, just to like invest 6 months into creating this product and getting it out, you had no idea if it was going to work. And then obviously, a lot of, just the classic story of 80% of machine learning projects don't make it, which was true in this case.
Yep.
A lot of things didn't work out, but the couple use cases that did work completely changed the way our company operated. And so, I was kind of thinking, and I actually hired my kind of lead VP of engineering from OneCart, and I was like, dude, remember how much this sucked? Like, we should make this more accessible to startups where they can rapidly iterate on machine learning concepts, they can get to production a lot quicker, they can test if it's going to work or not, and they don't have to have a significant investment. And that's why we find AI was always more accessible to enterprises, because they could use long time horizons, they could invest a lot of money. But for startups, seed, Series A, it just wasn't accessible. So that's kind of the market that we wanted to serve.
Yeah, it really does have to almost be built in your DNA. And if you're a startup, it is such a crapshoot. I really like that you put it that way. Like, when it works, and you see incredible success, and it changes the way the business actually operates. But you're not guaranteed that, and you may spend 6 months, 12 months, and never get there. So you're taking a significant risk. And that brings me to my next question. Like, there's the inspiration that you just laid out, but what exactly did you do to help bridge that gap?
So Cerebrium's the company's called Cerebrium, and what we do is we're a serverless infrastructure platform. So we make it easy for engineering teams to build, deploy, and scale AI applications. And the way we thought about it was, when we were building machine learning applications, like, we were focusing more on the infrastructure side. So what compute should we use? How does it scale? Like, how do we ingest data? Like, how do we store it? How do we run batch jobs? Instead of actually focusing on the customer and the use case at hand. And so with Cerebrium, we were like, okay, what if users could just focus on the product and not worry about the infrastructure? What would that unlock for teams? And so, that's kind of how Cerebrium was born, and that's kind of what we help customers do.
Mm. And I want to get to the speed in a minute, because that's really what got you all on my radar. I think I saw some benchmarks, and it was just like, either somebody is smoking crack or this is really fast. But before we get to that, what I am trying to think about is, there's always trade-offs that you as a developer are going to have to make when it comes to what you choose. And I imagine that you've been talking to a lot of folks about what the trade-offs are, if they want to use you versus if they want to go and just build it themselves, versus if they want to outsource all of that to maybe one of these LLM providers. How do you look at that and phrase it?
The way that I look at it is the same way that I kind of run my team. Like, I never try go from 0 to 100 solution. I always want to test something very quickly to confirm this is actually going to work, and rather than optimize. So typically when customers come to us and they tell us they want to fine tune their own LLM and then implement RAG and do all these things, I'm just like, okay, well, what have you done today? They're like, no, we're just going to start. I was like, well, maybe you should go use OpenAI first and implement RAG, see if your customers actually want a product like that, or it's going to serve your use case. And then,
so good.
if let's say you have a 50% success rate and the successes show good value, I'm like, okay, well then bring the data that you have, fine tune it on us, and then deploy it on us like a custom fine tuned model, whatever the case may be. So I like to approach it just in a piecewise fashion, where how can I get your results quickly and then keep going. There's obviously use cases where coming to us straight away, they already know that it's the right decision because of their use case, which is very specific. But more often than not, we kind of send them away and then they come back when they're in the scale phase.
You did touch on something there that I don't think a lot of engineers realize when they're building their solutions, which is you can make a very technically viable AI product that still fails horribly because someone doesn't want to type into a chat box.
Yeah. We've seen that so often with customers where they were providing, chat with your database, or let's say chat with our product. And it was a cool feature, but no one was willing to pay $2 extra for it, for example. So like, it's cool when it works, but no one was willing to pay for it. I guess the unit economics question of like businesses really comes into play that we've seen.
Yeah, and I've seen folks, I think some of the best ways that I've heard it talked about is that you've got cognitive load, or the cognitive load that is required when you're looking at an empty chat box is a certain amount, and it's quite high, versus the cognitive load if you log on to an app and you just start clicking photos, or you start swiping, or you start scrolling. Those are things that are much less cognitive load and easier for a user to interact with. So if you're a B2C type company and you have this amazing idea of an AI solution which increases the cognitive load of that end user, it's going to fail. And you don't need to spend all the time, energy, and effort putting out all this work for it to fail. I can tell you right now, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, I saw someone who like summarized it pretty succinctly, which is Sahel, one of the previous co-founders of Mixpanel. And he says, for every use case, you're not going to want to type into a box. You want to have like a workflow app that understands the workflows, that guides the user, and then, get you to the end result. And I thought that was like a pretty good way. So the app layer is always going to be there.
Exactly. And the chat, like the amount of work that I have to do to think about what it is that I want as my end state is a lot. And so to prompt it, and I'm not guaranteed that it's going to be successful if I prompt it. And what I've seen a lot with users is they don't have the patience to continue prompting. You try your first time, if it doesn't work, you're like, this is not a good feature, right?
Yeah.
So as you're going about creating Cerebrium, how'd you make it so fast, man? That's what I really want to know. Like, what is going on there?
I mean, yeah, I would say we found that like a specialization in like low latency applications. And the thing that we found was that people were going from running things on CPUs, which were like, what was a cent an hour, to now these GPUs are like dollars an hour. And so just the fundamental unit economics of businesses have now changed. And so we were like, okay, well, to get compute down, we did running like for the least amount of time as possible. And so I know we've done like 2 years of work just doing image caching, being really efficient on like storage, our container runtime, everything along those lines to get our cold start so low. So what we can basically do is just like start up your Python environment. We're now getting into GPU checkpointing where we can load model weights 60% faster as well. So basically all these like, kind of improvements over time lead you to running it just as like a serverless model or workload. We can just spin it up, you run it, you spin it down. And typically our customers save about 40% on costs. So that's where we've got like a lot of traction, as well as just our networking stack. So we've been like really optimizing, like how can we get latencies, from our users extremely low. So, I mean, obviously from DeepGram side, we've been working with you guys on like low latency voice applications. And I think we released this about last year with DeepGram and Daily, where we got it down to like a 500 millisecond end-to-end voice-to-voice responses. And that went pretty viral. Like, people still today are implementing that, and that's still the fastest that we've kind of seen. So
yeah, and just to also be clear, I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but on the inference side of things, that's where I was really surprised, I think, when I saw what you're doing. Are you doing like some kind of tricks with the CPU and GPU and how they play together? Or is it just you're like you're saying, you're spinning up GPUs, and maybe I'm getting lost with this question, so we might need to edit it out. I'm seeing like some confused looks on your face. You're like,
well, I mean, the way that we're doing it is like, I wouldn't say anything special, but there are definitely some tricks. So for example, like loading model weights, typically how it goes is it goes from disk to CPU to VRAM. And the one thing you can do is you can just skip CPU. You can just go straight from disk to GPU. So that's one thing. And again, that's not something like there's open source frameworks that you can use to do that. But then the other thing is you can now optimize, like you can get the end state of what your VRAM looks like after it's done all like the CUDA processing, things like that, when it loads models in. So we've now done like some work to actually store that. So that's like one use case. But I mean, yeah, I'd say we've done a couple of special things, but
that's the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's cool. But keep that for yourself. And if anybody else wants to know more about it, they can come talk to you.
Also, no, happy to help.
Yeah. So now, as you look forward and as you've been seeing, you've been working with customers, you've been doing all kinds of stuff in the space. Where do you get excited as you look forward? Like maybe just in the next 6 months, or dare I say in the next year, because who knows how long that actually is in like AI years.
I would say there's kind of like two trends that I'm very interested in. You know, pretty cool for me is always just, I mean, even as a young person, like back in the day, just being able to be an engineer and to create whatever I want to think about has always been like pretty phenomenal. So a cool thing for Cerebrium has always been the engineer is always like the lifeblood of innovation.
Hmm.
And at the moment there's 30 million software engineers in the world. And so we've always wanted to support them. However, what's pretty interesting to see how LLMs is now making software development more accessible to users and engineers. And so we think like, in the next 2 years, maybe there's an extra 30 million. And while they might not be extremely technical, they can still, create some sort of machine learning product. So I think just seeing this massive entrance of like engineers into the market using LLMs, I think is something fascinating. I think the applications that people are going to create are going to be phenomenal. I think the second thing that I'm interested in as well is, everyone talks about agents. I think like people are doing them more internally now because they're very experimental. But what I do find is that a lot of spend is going to go from employee salary spend to actually going towards like these agent use cases and paying for the compute. And so I just think it's going to be interesting to see how like companies' expenses, instead of salary being the main cost basis, I think compute's honestly going to be it. I think those are two interesting things that I'm interested to see if it actually turns out to be like that or if I'm completely wrong. But yeah, I would say, I mean, even across industries, voice, healthcare, yeah, there's been phenomenal use cases that we've seen. So it's pretty exciting to see what people are working on. And I guess we've got a front row seat. I mean, people come to us when they're starting. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
It is interesting that you talk about like the where the money goes with the agents and how you can justify agents, because what a good friend of mine was talking about was how with the advent of prices basically plummeting for LLM calls, right? You see that they're trending towards zero, but at the same time, we are creating more complexity in our systems and how we are architecting the agents, or just like using more LLM calls every time that somebody wants a query answered or wants something done with their AI product. And then on top of that, you see that if someone is having success with their AI product, people are going to start using it more. So if you think about it that way, you think about, wow, the cost, yeah, of the one LLM call is going down, but the complexity means we have more LLM calls. And then the success cases mean that we have people using it more. You start to look at, does this make sense economically? But I always have in the back of my head the side where someone says, if you compare it to what a human cost would be, it's always going to make sense. It's always going to be cheaper in that regard. And so I find that kind of framing and just thought experiment fascinating to look at.
I mean, what we've seen is, when companies move to like our serverless runtime, we save them a bunch of costs. However, even though like, they go from spending, let's say 100K a month to doing like 60K, and like, obviously we would want them to spend 100K. They typically just reinvest that into the product or into marketing. And slowly they work their way back up to being at 100K, but now they're serving, let's say 30%, 30% more customers, for example.
Yes.
And so we kind of just see that pattern